What if following God meant losing everything, but gaining a legacy that would long outlive you? Today, we're going to be unpacking the story of Adoniram Judson, whose unshakable mission and vision left an eternal legacy that long outlived him. There's a quote from Adoniram Judson. He says, "There is no success without sacrifice. If you succeed without sacrifice, it is because someone has suffered before you. If you sacrifice without success, it is because someone will succeed after." And so he understood. He's like, look, there is no success without sacrifice. Either this is being built on those who have sacrificed before me, but often in the times where he wasn't seeing success, he said, somebody will succeed after me because I was willing to sacrifice. And 4 of those children die before adulthood. And then that wife passes away and then gets married a 3rd time and goes back. I mean, at that point, wouldn't you just kind of be like, I've done enough? Yeah. But he's like, no, I'm going back there.
And so, he had a bold vision to finish.
Yep. And so at this point, I believe he devotes about 40 years of his life in Burma. And as a youth pastor, like, we hear that, and it's just like, a parent was upset with me.
Yeah.
And I don't mean like to make that trite, but like, that's what.
Just so discouraged because we had 10 less students here.
That got me. It's like travel sports.
Yeah, it's like I feel so discouraged because travel sports.
Yeah, and we're all guilty of that. So we're not going to leave you alone. But so Keith, you are a missionary biography nerd.
I love missionary biographies.
The problem is you've turned me into a missionary biography nerd.
Not a problem at all.
Because it combines my love for history with my love for God's kingdom. Yes. And so today we actually did go check it out. I believe it's episode 87. Or around there. We did one on Hudson Taylor. We did the 4 essential habits youth pastors must learn from Hudson Taylor. So go check that one out, where we talked about Hudson Taylor's work in China Inland Mission.
Oh no, wait, it's not 87. It was 86.
86. Yeah. Okay, so go check that out. If you see an orange thumbnail of a smiling, pleasant old man, that's the one you're looking for. But today we're going to be unpacking Adoniram Judson, and you might have heard of him. Adoniram Judson is somewhat famous for the fact that he's kind of often seen as the first American missionary to really go overseas and be sent. And so what we're the plan is today is just kind of share his story. And man, if you have not heard Adoniram Judson's story, like it is such a cool story. He's kind of become my favorite. For reasons that we'll unpack over the podcast. But it is just so encouraging to hear these stories, because you're like, how much these men and women accomplished with a fraction of the resources we had.
That's what really challenges me, and that's why I love it, is because you really can't complain in our modern ministries, like when you see how much they did for how little they had.
Yeah.
And like the communication, I mean, like literally, like to go be a missionary, you couldn't just create a video and send it over to someone. Like, you had to pack up your stuff in a coffin usually.
Yep.
Because that was like a symbol, just like, okay, we probably won't return.
Yeah.
Like we'll die over there. Mm-hmm. And then spend 8 months on a ship trying to get over somewhere.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then get there and then be persecuted or hated or die of malaria or there's
all the above.
Yeah, or all the above.
Well, and so before we jump into the story, because it's important to kind of remember the focus, you had a mentor tell you, hey, when you're studying missionary biographies, to look at these 3 things. What are those 3 things for our listeners?
So look at the achievements that they had. So like what did the Lord use them to do? The character that they had, and then the hardships that they experienced.
Yeah.
So like, what are some things as you're reading a missionary biography? What character did they have? What hardships did they experience? And what achievements did they accomplish? Yeah.
So we're gonna highlight all of that, but we'll begin where any story begins, and that's at the beginning. And so,
once upon a time.
Yes, there you go. Adoniram Judson. So he was raised in a Christian home, and he was born in, he was born in 1788, I believe 1788, in Northeast. And so he was born to Christian parents, but he went off to college, and he had not yet accepted Christ, but he went off to college. And as he was off at college at Brown University, he met a young man and similar his age named Jacob Eames. And Jacob Eames was an atheist who, through befriending Judson, kind of convinced him and led him away from a Christian worldview. Again, at this point, Judson, looking back, would say he was not a believer at this time. but again was raised in a Christian household. And so Jacob Eames and Judson became very close. And after graduation, Judson went and started touring around the country with some not so great characters. So it was kind of like just like entertainment acts that would go from like one city to the next. And he kind of grew tired of it because eventually he realized at one point that they weren't paying. They would get up early in the morning and leave the boarding house, and they wouldn't pay. And so he kind of came to his senses, and he was like, "What am I doing? Like, why am I doing this stuff?" And so Judson left that, and he kind of didn't know what to go from there. He was kind of lost. He'd graduated from Brown. He was doing this as a career, and he was like, this isn't for me. So he left the theater business and industry, and so he was just traveling through, and he stopped at a boarding house. He needed a place to stay, and so he went up to the lady running the boarding house. He said, "Hey, do you have any rooms?" And she said, "Yes, we have one room available." And he said, "I'll take it." And this is all documented. And she said, "Well, before you take it, I need to tell you something." And he was like, "Okay, what's going on?" She goes, "There's a young man in the room next door who's very sick, and he's groaning a lot. You can hear him. It's very obvious he's suffering, and the room is right next door. It borders that one." And he said, "It's not a problem. I'll take it." And so Judson went up to the room, and he heard this young man in the room next to him groaning and moaning and obviously very much in pain. And he began to kind of reflect on some things and obviously couldn't sleep. So he was kind of hearing this. And in the middle of the night, it kind of quieted down. So he was finally able to get some sleep. And so he checked out the next morning. And as he's checking out, he asked the lady, he's like, "I noticed it quieted down. Like, how's the young man doing?" And she said, "Oh, he passed away last night." And, that was kind of like a little bit of shocking to him. It's like, "Oh, I heard this person like in their last moments." And he was like, "Hey, by chance, do you happen to know anything about him?" And she goes, "Yeah, his name was Jacob Eames." And so it was the very one that he had befriended at college who led him astray from a Christian worldview that he ended up hearing, without knowing who it was, his dying moments and how agonizing and how torturous it was. And that really rocked him. And he was like, "Wait, what in the world is going on? Like, this is somebody who was convincing me in what to believe." And then in their final moments, it obviously brought them no peace. And so that was a wake up call. And so Judson actually was like, "You know what? I'm going to go to seminary and see what all this is about." So he actually went to seminary, and in that first year in seminary, he gave his life to Christ, and he became a Christian. And so that to me, just right off the bat of man, what a testimony. I know we say there are no such thing as a boring testimony, and that's absolutely true, but that story is just so how God got a hold of him and made it really clear. Yeah. And so then Judson, after going to seminary, was convinced that God was calling him to the mission field. And during this time, he met a young woman named Ann Hasseltine, and of course they fell in love. And Keith, you actually have the letter that he wrote, asking for his his future wife's hand in marriage. Yeah. And he wrote a letter to his future father-in-law.
Yeah. So if you're watching this.
Hey everyone, hope you're enjoying this episode on Adoniram Judson. And as I mentioned earlier in this podcast episode, that he is probably my favorite missionary. And it's just this idea of seeing what God used him to do despite all the challenges and circumstances in his way. And part of that is just being encouraged by his story, even though we've never met. And so one of the things that we love to do is connect youth pastors and youth leaders to encourage one another as well. And the way that we do that is through our Youth Ministry Mastermind. And the Youth Ministry Mastermind is our free online community for youth pastors and youth directors, filled with free resources, tips, live trainings, and most importantly, just encouragement with other like-minded youth pastors who desperately want to see the gospel go forward in their community and in the lives of their students. And so if that sounds like something that you want to get involved in and be a part of, you can go ahead and just check the description below. You'll find that link to the Youth Ministry Mastermind. Go ahead, follow that link. It'll take 30 seconds to join. Again, we want nothing from you other than the gospel to go forward. Go ahead, check that out. And when you do, you'll actually get a message from me, Ryan. We're hoping to set up a time just to hear what God is doing in your ministry. Any way we can be of an encouragement to you, any challenges you're facing, any things that we can help provide perspective on, we would love to do just that. So go ahead, check in the description below, follow that link, join the Youth Ministry Mastermind if you haven't already. If you have, invite somebody else. And then we hope you enjoy the rest of this episode.
You're watching this and you're a guy and you ask permission, from your father-in-law to marry your bride, or maybe you even have a daughter, and I just want you to put yourself in the situation of, one, boldly asking or writing this letter, but then two, put yourself in the situation of this father, who's this guy is going to this field and he's receives this letter asking for his daughter's hand in marriage. So Anne Hasseltine was her name. It says, I have now to ask whether you can consent to part with your daughter early next spring, to see her no more in this world, whether you can consent to her departure to a heathen land and her subjection to the hardships and sufferings of a missionary life, whether you can consent to exposure to the dangers of the ocean, to the fatal influence of the southern climate of India, to every kind of want and distress, to degradation, insult, persecution, and perhaps a violent death. Can you consent to all this? For the sake of him who left his heavenly home and died for her and for you, for the sake of perishing immortal souls, for the sake of Zion and the glory of God, can you consent to all this in hope of soon meeting your daughter in the world of glory, with a crown of righteousness brightened by the acclamations of praise, which shall resound to her Savior from heathens saved through her means from eternal woe and despair? Can you consent to this? That is interesting.
And his father-in-law said...
Yeah, he said yes. So it goes on to say, our Lord Jesus said to us in very solemn words, truly, truly, I say to you, unless a grain of wheat falls to the earth and dies, it remains alone. But if it dies, it bears much fruit. John 12:24. Then he adds this, whoever loves his life loses it, and whoever hates his life in this world will keep it for eternal life. In other words, a fruitful life and eternal life come from this, dying like a seed and hating your life in this world. Let us die as soon as possible. And by whatever process God shall appoint. And when we are dead to the world, in nature and self, we shall begin to live to God.
Goodness.
Yours truly, Adoniram Judson.
That reminds me of another missionary where they were headed to, I believe, Burma. Adoniram Judson, New Zealand, New Zealand and Papua New Guinea, somewhere in that area. This was, of course, like centuries ago. And the captain that was taking them, there's about 10 of them, and he said, you really need to turn back. And this captain was not a believer and kept trying to say, don't go here, like they were known for their cannibalism and headhunting. And the guy said, if you go, you will die. And the missionary looked at him and said, we died before we came here. And I was like, goodness. And Adoniram Judson, he said at one point, how great are my obligations to spend and be spent for Christ. What a privilege to be allowed to serve him and suffer for him. And so we see that Judson, and we see the sovereignty of God and how God got a hold of his heart. But other thing that we should learn and take away is his complete surrender to God. And he and Anne were, joined in that. And what a beautiful picture of marriage. It's not exactly like romantic, like you might not see that in a Hallmark movie of like that, asking for hand in marriage with that letter. But man, how much was Anne's dad a man of God to be able to say yes to that?
Yeah.
And and so they said yes. They were married and they headed to India first, was actually the plan. If I remember correctly, you might know better than I do, but they went over there with other missionaries. They're a Baptist denomination, and on the way over there, they had a falling out on a doctrinal issue. And it was kind of mutual, but they were like, look, we really shouldn't serve together if we can't. It was kind of in that tier 2 where it was like big enough to where it's like, I don't know if we should partner in this. And so that's when they decided, hey, we're actually going to head on and continue to Burma. And on the way to Burma to do this, Anne, they found out she was pregnant. And on the way to Burma on the ship, Anne gave birth to a stillborn son. And so their first son was born stillborn. And you can imagine just like all the excitement of going off to the mission field, and then your wife's pregnant, and then while on the ship, she gives birth to a stillborn son. And so the hardships in Judson's life are just incomprehensible.
But it's just the beginning.
Yeah.
Well, and just on that note about location, so he had this quote where he says, "I make it my ambition to preach the gospel, not where Christ has already been named, lest I build on someone else's foundation. But as it is written, those who have never been told of him will see, and those who have never heard will understand." Yeah. So he's like, I don't want to go where people have gone before.
Yeah.
I want to, pioneer new territory.
Yeah, you can see why he's my favorite if you're listening to this. But he gets over there to Burma, and he and Ann, and they kind of say, okay, like what is the mission? And Judson commits to translating the Bible into Burmese. And of course, at this point, the gospel had not gone to Burma. It had not been translated any part in their own language. And so he begins to study for 12 hours a day in Burmese. And so you can imagine like 12 hours a day committing to learn just a completely foreign language.
Yeah.
And he begins work on translating the Bible into the New Testament, into Burmese. And I believe Anne even worked on a little bit of Siamese. I have to do more research on that, but I think that's correct. And so in the meantime, they said, look, we're doing this to try and translate the Bible. But in the meantime, how can we kind of begin to create relationships with the locals? And so they constructed what is called, I believe it's pronounced as a Zayat, Zayat. And what it kind of was like a roadside stand to kind of just stop and get out of the heat. So they were built along the road, kind of open air, but with a thatched roof. And so that way people could stop in, and it was kind of a part of the community. Like these were very prevalent. And so they built one and said, look, this is kind of a way that will create inroads. And so they began to do all of this. And during this time, wife Anne gets pregnant with another son, Roger. And so their son Roger is born. And then Roger dies at 7 months old. So on the way over to the mission field, stillborn son, come over here, begin this work, this grueling work, and just a just extremely hot climate. You can imagine that, it took a while to adapt to the climate and all this stuff. And then their son Roger dies at 7 months old. But they continued to work at the mission. And after 6 years, Judson finally leads the first Burmese convert to Christ. So after 6 years, Judson finally leads a Burmese man to Christ. And soon a group of 12 to 18 Burmese nationals began to take the gospel to surrounding villages. And so I can't even imagine 7 years of planting. That's an entire youth group class.
Yeah.
To not.
Well, also I love how intentionally it was. And this is what we can learn from just how devoted he was to the mission. That it wasn't like he needed to reach everybody. He was already early on. Yeah. Like as soon as he saw a convert, he started equipping people to take the gospel to their own people. And so I think a lesson we can learn about youth ministry is like students are going to reach their own generation, and we want to, as youth leaders, equip them to do so. Yeah, and
Judson once said, the motto for every missionary, whether preacher, printer, or schoolmaster, ought to be, quote, devoted for life. Mm-hmm. And so he did not say, well, I'm the missionary, I'll take care of this. No, he wanted to train Burmese nationals to reach their own as he continued the translation in the New Testament into Burmese. And so you can imagine there's probably a lot of excitement. He's like, okay, I've been doing all this stuff. Things have been finally going well. The deaths of our two sons are behind us, and I'm sure that was still immense weight and grief, but now the mission is starting to take off. And then in 1824, war breaks out. And so in 1824, the Anglo-Burmese War breaks out between England and Burma. And all foreign, quote, spies, including Judson, are arrested and thrown into prison. And the prison, interestingly enough, they took convicted criminals. They didn't want to spare people to fight the war, so they took convicted criminals, many of them murderers, and made them the prison guards who would run this prison. And so the prison's run by convicted murderers, and each day at 3 o'clock, the prison guards would pick a prisoner at random to execute, to show a force, to keep prisoners in line. And at night, the men sleep hanging upside down. And so Anne is pregnant at this time, and Adoniram's taken, of course, imprisoned. Imagine waking up every day saying, well, they're going to pick one of us today to execute. Like, is today going to be me? And then at night, they would literally, they would sleep upside down, so they would have their ankles in locks and chains above them. And so their kind of legs would be perpendicular to the ground, and then their backs kind of be parallel to the ground, so kind of at a 90-degree angle with their bodies to make sure that there was no escape. And Anne, who's pregnant, she keeps Adoniram alive by bringing him food each day. So she brings him food each day, looks after him, takes care of him every day as she's pregnant, coming and taking care of him, seeing the conditions that he's in. And there's a really unique story with Judson, as there is to just every part of his life.
Yeah.
He had almost completed the New Testament in Burmese at this point, but they knew that if they found the New Testament, that they would destroy it. If the Burmese government, the officials, they would look for this, and if they found it, they destroyed it. And so Anne's going, what do I do with this translated piece of the New Testament into Burmese? And so she has an idea. She says, I'm going to sew it into a pillow, and I'm going to bring it to Judson in prison. And so that way it'll be safe, because nobody will ever expect it in this. And in fact, others looked at the pillow and ridiculed Judson for the pillow because they're like, it's so lumpy. So like nobody, like even the prison guards didn't take the pillow because they're like, this is so uncomfortable. Like, why would you ever do this? And so she sewed it into a pillow. And so think about this. Every night, Judson would rest his head on God's word as he went to sleep in this prison that he had been working on. But the story gets even crazier because, yes, one day they transfer, they just pack up and they take everybody and they transfer them to a different location. And so Judson doesn't get to bring this pillow with him. So this pillow is lost. And you can imagine 12 hours a day, at this point, almost a decade of work, all handwritten. There's no copies of this. It is all right here. Literally a decade of work is gone. And one day, I believe it's a baker, somehow sees this pillow that was just kind of thrown in a trash heap, recognizes it as Adoniram Judson's pillow, does not know what's on the inside, and he brings it to Anne. And he goes, hey, I found this pillow. And she rejoices because the translated New Testament was in this pillow. And so then Judson is going to a general's village, and they find out that they're pretty much all the prisoners are going to be buried alive. So the Burmese are not doing well in this conflict. They realize, hey, this isn't going well. We can't keep doing this, and they're going to bury them alive. So Judson is getting ready to be killed by being buried alive. But in that moment, the British propose a treaty to the King of Burma. But they need somebody to translate between the King of Burma and the British. And so they remember, hey, there's this guy, Adoniram Judson, who's fluent in both Burmese and English. And they come to the general's village and they take him. And he doesn't know why. And they take him to go to translate these treaty negotiations. And so again, God spares his life. And Judson, his quote was, "The prospects are as bright as the promises of God." And so we see that even in the midst of immense trials, Judson still had faith. And so Judson negotiates this treaty that not negotiates, but translates the negotiations that ends this war. But then later on, Judson begins to work negotiating a second treaty for religious freedom in Burma. And during this, he's away from Anne, and Anne gets pregnant again. And Anne gives birth, and then Anne dies. And then she gave birth to a daughter, Maria, and 6 months later, Maria dies. And so while he's off doing this, his wife Anne dies, and then 6 months later, his daughter Maria dies. So at this point, his wife has died. His first son's been born stillborn. Second son was died at 7 months, and then his daughter dies at 6 months. And so at this point, Adoniram just like, I can't do this anymore. And
kind of has a breakdown.
He does.
Yeah.
He does. He has a mental breakdown, and he retreats into the jungle. He builds a hut by himself, and for 4 years, he lives in complete isolation. And man,
imagine what those 4 years were like.
Yeah, just the wrestling with God that would be there. And he wrote, I believe during this time, there's a quote that's attributed to him, "God is to me the great unknown. I believe in him, but I find him not." And so the reason that we wanted to highlight this is like, even giants of the faith have struggles, have doubts, have to wrestle with God and be like, God, I do not get this. And so here's a man who, from the outside looking in, you're just like, man, he's unfazed by all this. But the reality is like, no, he was human. Like, he was extremely, extremely stricken with grief. And so for 4 years, he literally moves into the jungle, builds a hut, and just doesn't talk to anybody for 4 years. And he's got no family now in Burma. He's by himself. All of this, the gospel is still going forward at this point, but he is just kind of like, I need to care for myself, right? I need to just be alone with the great physician, just me and him. And so at the end of those 4 years, whatever. I mean,
whatever happened in those 40 years formulated the next phase of his life.
And I would imagine he was probably never the same after that. I would imagine you probably never the same, but he returns back to the city that he was originally in, and he begins translating the Old Testament into Burmese. So at this point, the New Testament's been translated into Burmese. Now he begins translating the Old Testament. And during this time, he meets a fellow missionary, Sarah Boardman, and in 1834, they get married. So this is... what is this about? Well, I mean, at least 4 years, but I believe close to 8 years after Anne and his daughter pass away, he meets Sarah Boardman. They marry in 1834, and they have 8 children, but 4 of those children die before adulthood. And they married in 1834. 11 years later, Sarah's health begins to fail. And so she travels back to the United States, and she dies on the ship on the way back to the U.S. So now at this point, he has lost 7 kids and 2 wives. He has 4 children.
4 children left.
And he's working on the Old Testament. And so after Sarah's death, Adoniram moves back to the U.S. And you can imagine, again, like at this point, I don't even know how you're walking through this. But he then meets his 3rd wife, Emily, and you can imagine at this point, it's like, maybe don't marry this guy. Like this hasn't turned out well. But I mean, that what his proposal of sorts to Anne was true. Like he understood. And so it doesn't seem like this, like, oh, everything will be fine. It's like, no, he knew
that there was risk.
Yeah. And so he meets his 3rd wife, Emily. The 2, of course, had passed away at this point, meets his 3rd wife, and they head back to Burma. And Adoniram eventually completes the Old Testament in Burmese. And
so he had translated both Testaments, the whole Bible
into Burmese by hand, just working at it, studying the language, doing all of that. And so at this point, Judson's, of course, earthly time is running short. And so after he finishes the Old Testament, his health begins to fail. And on the voyage back to the U.S. in 1850, he dies at sea. And so it's kind of sobering to think about how many of his family was buried at sea with the deaths at sea and the voyages. So it just highlights even the danger of the voyage to even go over to these places. And Judson said this, just kind of summing up his life, and then we'll look at his lasting legacy. There's a quote from Adoniram Judson. He says, "There is no success without sacrifice. If you succeed without sacrifice, it is because someone has suffered before you. If you sacrifice without success, it is because someone will succeed after." And so he understood. He's like, look, there is no success without sacrifice. Either this is being built on those who have sacrificed before me, but often in the times where he wasn't seeing success, he said, somebody will succeed after me because I was willing to sacrifice. And you can certainly see through his life. So to summarize, he heads to Burma and
doesn't see any real progress for
7 years. Yep. And then is imprisoned during this time. The threat of execution. God in His sovereignty rescues him multiple times his earthly life. Wife gives birth to a stillborn son. 7-month-old son passes away. Then his wife gives birth. She passes away. And then 6 months later, their daughter, Maria, dies. Gets remarried. 4 of those children die before adulthood. And then that wife passes away. And then gets married a 3rd time and goes back. I mean, at that point, wouldn't you just kind of be like, I've done enough? Yeah. But he's like, no, I'm going back there.
He had a mission. He had a bold vision to finish.
Yep. And so at this point, I believe he devotes about 40 years of his life in Burma. And but what's cool is to see what's happened since. So this, he dies in 1850. That of course, we're almost 200 years removed from that. But we see that for 30 years he worked on translating the Bible into Burmese, and he completed it. Man, what a If you're local to the DC area like we are, like going to the Museum of the Bible, they have one room where they see, they show all the different languages that the Bible has been translated into. And when you look at the one into Burmese, it's like, that was Adoniram Judson. Like that was not a group of translators. That was one guy who made that possible. And today, 2.5 million Burmese identify as Christians. And to identify as a Christian in Burma is not something to be taken lightly, because there's extreme religious prosecution. And I don't even know how this happened. I legit don't know the backstory, but kind of the leader of the opposition, not by his own doing, but kind of has just kind of become, things are really bad in Burma right now. And so kind of the guy who's working with all these foreign governments is a guy named Sasa Chin. And he's a medical doctor by trade, but he's a believer. And he actually spoke at our church like 4 years ago, before the regime officially started really going after. But pretty much all those 2.5 million Christians are hidden in the jungles in Burma right now. They've had to retreat and create their own settlements for fear of religious persecution. And he's a wanted man by the Burmese government. Wow. And they've kind of, because he's done such great things for the people, they've kind of elevated him, not through his own seeking. And so when I heard about Adoniram Judson after hearing this guy speak, I was like, you're proof of his lasting legacy of what God has done through all of that.
Yeah. Well, there was a guy, Patrick Johnston. He estimated that in Myanmar, which is Burma's new name, Baptist Convention, to be 3,700 congregations with 617,000 plus members and over 1.9 million affiliates. Which, it's probably even more now because it's a little bit dated. But 2.5 million believers as a result of this man's faithful work over 30 years, 40 years.
So as a youth pastor, we hear that, and it's just like a parent was upset with me the other night.
Yeah.
And I don't mean to make that trite, but that's what.
I felt just so discouraged because we had 10 less students here.
That got me. It's like travel sports.
It's like I feel so discouraged because travel sports.
Yeah, and we're all guilty of that. So we're not going to leave you alone. But so I think we'll continue to highlight some missionaries on some upcoming podcasts. But we'd encourage you, don't wait. And you actually have a website that you'd encourage people to check out.
Wholesomewords.org. Is where you can, there's shorter versions of the biographies. Obviously, if you wanted to read, you can do book biographies, but if you want to just kind of get a familiar, feel for different missionaries, wholesomewords.org has different shorter biographies that you can even print them off, if you're old school, if you can read them digitally. But it's a great way to learn about multiple ones in a short amount of time because, they're like summaries.
Yeah. And one thing we've both done is we've taken series in youth ministry to walk through some of these missionary stories.
We had a whole series called History Makers in our ministry where I covered, and it wasn't obviously just talking about their lives, but tying it back to what was usually there's a common theme of what they focused on or a passage of scripture, and so I would teach from that scripture and use their life as a kind of a character study. Yeah.
Yeah, so hopefully you've been inspired to go learn more about missionary biographies. Maybe your favorite will be Adoniram Judson, like mine. Is your favorite Hudson Taylor? I know it's hard for you to pick a favorite, but would you say?
I really like C.T. Studd.
C.T. Studd.
Actually.
All right.
But Hudson Taylor, though, we've done Hudson Taylor.
Yeah.
There's hard to narrow it down. I'd say if I had to choose one, though, C.T. Studd I really like.
Well, that'll probably be the next missionary that we tackle at some point in the future, but we do appreciate you guys checking this out. As always, check out the Youth Ministry Mastermind, which is our community sponsored by Beyond the Youth Room for youth pastors and youth leaders. You can check that link out in the description. That is all free to you, free resources, free trainings, free calls, and it's also the best way to stay tuned for any exciting announcements which we have coming up, which we have some of. So we would love for you to participate in that. So go ahead, follow that link in the description, and check that out, and we'll see you on the next episode.